Commander Richard Ashford grabbed Marcus Cole by the collar and shoved him away from the helicopter. "Get your filthy hands off my aircraft, boy!" The word hung in the salt air like a slap. 60 sailors watched. Nobody moved. Marcus steadied himself. His voice came out quiet, controlled. "Sir, I heard something wrong before it failed." Ashford laughed, the kind of laugh that cuts bone. "You heard something with that welfare degree." He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms wide. "Tell you what, recruit, fix this helicopter and I'll marry you myself." What Ashford didn't know, he'd just made a promise that would end his career. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning had started like every other morning for Marcus Cole. 0500 hours. Darkness still thick over the Pacific. The USS Valor cutting through waves that had been rolling since before humans built boats. Marcus pulled himself from his rack bones, aching from another night on a mattress thin enough to feel the steel beneath. 4 months. 4 months he'd been on this carrier, and not once had he touched an aircraft engine. He was qualified. More than qualified. His test scores sat in a file somewhere, probably buried under paperwork nobody wanted to read. 97th percentile in mechanical diagnostics. 94th in aviation systems. Numbers that should have meant something. Instead, he cleaned. Toilets. Decks. Whatever nobody else wanted to touch. Marcus splashed water on his face and stared at the small mirror bolted to the wall. 22 years old. Felt like 42. The fluorescent light made his dark skin look gray, his eyes older than they had any right to be. "Another day in paradise," he muttered. His rackmate, a white kid from Ohio named Peters, was already dressed. "Heard something's going down on the flight deck," Peters said. "Seahawk came in rough last night. They can't figure out what's wrong." Marcus felt that familiar pull in his chest. The same pull he'd felt since he was 9 years old, watching his grandfather bring dead engines back to life. "They'll figure it out," Marcus said, forcing himself to reach for the mop instead of the door to the flight deck. Peters paused at the hatch. "You know you could just go up there, offer to help, and get my head taken off by Ashford." Marcus shook his head. "I'll pass." "Suit yourself." Peters left. Marcus stood there, mop in hand, listening to his own breathing in the empty compartment. The pull didn't go away. It never did. Today, by 0700, word had spread through the ship like fire through dry brush. The MH-60R Seahawk, the pride of the carrier's helicopter squadron, was dead. Not damaged. Not wounded. Dead. The kind of dead that made senior mechanics scratch their heads and check diagnostic screens that told them nothing useful. Marcus heard fragments as he mopped the passageway outside the officer's mess. Tried everything. Rodriguez thinks it's the gearbox. Ashford's losing his mind. NATO inspection next week. $40 million just sitting there. He kept his head down. Kept pushing the mop. Kept pretending he didn't care. But his hands were shaking. He knew that helicopter. Knew it the way a man knows his own heartbeat. He'd studied the MH-60R schematics during every free hour, memorizing systems that nobody asked him to memorize, learning maintenance procedures that nobody would ever let him perform. And yesterday, when that Seahawk had come in for landing, Marcus had heard something. Not wrong exactly, just off. A frequency in the rotor wash that didn't belong. A vibration that spoke of trouble brewing somewhere deep in the machine's guts. He'd almost said something. Almost. Then he'd remembered Ashford's face the last time Marcus had opened his mouth about aircraft. The way the commander had looked at him like he was something stuck to the bottom of a boot. "This isn't your neighborhood garage recruit. Know your place." So Marcus had kept quiet. Watched the helicopter taxi to its spot on the deck. Told himself it was probably nothing. Now that helicopter wouldn't start. And Marcus couldn't stop thinking about what he'd heard. At 0900, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He didn't plan it, didn't think it through. His feet just started moving, carrying him up ladders and through hatches, until he stood at the edge of the flight deck, salt wind hitting his face like a wake-up call. The Seahawk sat in the middle of a circle of mechanics. Its engine cowling was open guts exposed to the morning sun. Men in oil-stained coveralls crowded around diagnostic equipment, arguing in the kind of voices that meant nobody had answers. Commander Richard Ashford stood at the center of it all. Even from 50 feet away, Marcus could feel the man's presence. Ashford was the kind of officer who took up space just by existing. Tall. Broad. Silver eagles on his collar catching light. His uniform was immaculate even on the flight deck, as if dirt itself was afraid to touch him. Ashford had commanded the aviation detachment for 3 years. In that time, he'd built a reputation for two things: getting results and crushing anyone who didn't fit his image of what a sailor should look like. Marcus definitely didn't fit. "What's the status?" Ashford's voice carried across the deck. Senior Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez wiped sweat from his forehead. "Sir, we've run every diagnostic in the book. Computer says all systems are nominal, but she won't turn over. It's like..." "Like what?" "Like she's playing dead on purpose." Ashford's jaw tightened. "Helicopters don't play dead, Senior Chief. They break and we fix them. That's how this works." "Yes, sir, but how long for a replacement engine?" Rodriguez hesitated. 72 hours, minimum. We'd have to fly one in from... "We don't have 72 hours. Ashford's voice dropped. "Dangerous. The NATO inspection is in 5 days. Admiral Morrison is flying in personally. If this aircraft isn't operational..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Everyone on that deck knew what was at stake. Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd watching, listening. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "Every machine has a heartbeat, boy. Close your eyes. Feel what it's trying to tell you." Before he could stop himself, Marcus took a step forward, then another. His feet carried him past mechanics who were too focused on their screens to notice. Past officers who'd never learned his name. Past the invisible line that separated people like him from people who mattered. He reached the helicopter and placed his hand on the engine housing, closed his eyes, and listened. "Chick, what the hell do you think you're doing?" The voice hit Marcus like a physical blow. He opened his eyes to find Commander Ashford 3 feet away, face twisted into something between rage and disbelief. "Sir, Get your hands off my helicopter." Marcus stepped back, but he didn't drop his gaze. Something in him refused to look away. "Sir, I think I know what's wrong." The flight deck went quiet. 60 sailors stopped what they were doing. The wind kept blowing, but everything else froze. Ashford stared at Marcus like he was looking at an alien species. "You think you know what's wrong?" His voice was flat, deadly. "Yes, sir. Before the helicopter landed yesterday, I heard..." "You heard." Ashford cut him off. "With those ears, from the janitor station." A few mechanics snickered. Marcus felt heat rise in his chest, but kept his voice steady. "The rotor wash had an unusual harmonic signature, sir. A frequency that suggests frequency." Ashford stepped closer, so close Marcus could smell his aftershave. "Listen to me very carefully, recruit. Do you know what I see when I look at you?" Marcus said nothing. "I see a boy from the bayou who somehow slipped through the cracks. I see a community college degree from a school I've never heard of. I see someone who should be grateful we let him mop our floors." Every word was a blade. Marcus felt them cutting, but he didn't bleed. Not on the outside. "Sir, my test scores..." "Your test scores don't mean a damn thing on my deck." Ashford turned to address the crowd, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "This is what happens when we lower standards, when we let sentiment override qualification. This recruit thinks his welfare education makes him qualified to diagnose a $40 million aircraft." The crowd shifted. Some faces showed discomfort. Others showed amusement. Most showed nothing at all. Marcus thought about walking away. Thought about keeping his head down like he'd done for 4 months. Like his mama had told him to do. Like survival required. But then, he thought about his grandfather. Papa Joe had faced men like Ashford his whole life. In Vietnam, where he'd kept helicopters flying with nothing but wire and willpower. In Louisiana after the war, where white men with clean hands told him what he couldn't do, couldn't be, couldn't dream. And Papa Joe had never backed down. Not once. "Sir." Marcus's voice came out stronger than he expected. "With respect, I know what I heard, and I know how to fix it." The flight deck went impossibly quiet. Ashford's eyes narrowed. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Not anger. Something worse. The look of a man who'd just been challenged in front of his subordinates and couldn't afford to let it stand. "You know how to fix it." "Yes, sir." "This $40 million helicopter that my best mechanics can't diagnose." "Yes, sir." Ashford laughed. The sound was sharp enough to draw blood. "Well, well." He turned to the crowd again, spreading his arms like a ringmaster. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a volunteer. Private Marcus Cole from—" He snapped his fingers. "Where are you from again, boy?" "Louisiana, sir." "Louisiana." Ashford rolled the word around like something sour. "Recruit Cole from Louisiana thinks he can fix what my team cannot." He stepped back, gesturing toward the helicopter with exaggerated courtesy. "Tell you what, recruit, I'll make you a deal. Right here, right now, in front of all these witnesses." Marcus felt the trap closing, knew he should back down. But Papa Joe's voice was louder than his fear. "Never let them see you break, son. You stand tall, even if they burn you down." "I'm listening, sir." "Fix this helicopter." Ashford smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Fix it before dawn tomorrow, and I'll personally recommend you for officer training. I'll write a letter to the academy myself. Hell, I'll call the admiral and tell him we've got a genuine genius on our hands." The crowd murmured. That was a significant promise coming from Ashford, a man who hoarded recommendations like treasure. But Ashford wasn't finished. "In fact," he continued, voice rising to carry across the entire deck, "fix this helicopter, and I'll marry you myself. We'll have the ceremony right here. I'll wear my dress whites." Laughter exploded across the flight deck. Nervous at first, then genuine. Someone clapped. Someone else wolf whistled. Marcus stood perfectly still while the mockery washed over him. He'd heard words like this before, felt the weight of being reduced to a punchline. It hurt. It always hurt. But he'd learned to carry pain without letting it break him. "And if I can't fix it?" he asked. Ashford's smile widened. "If you can't fix it, which you can't, you'll have your transfer request on my desk by noon tomorrow. I'll make sure you're assigned to the most remote supply depot I can find. You'll spend the rest of your enlistment counting paper clips in Alaska." The crowd went quiet again. This wasn't just humiliation anymore. This was a man's career hanging in the balance. Rodriguez stepped forward. "Commander, maybe we should stay out of this, Senior Chief." Ashford didn't look away from Marcus. The recruit made his choice. Now he gets to live with it. Marcus looked past Ashford to the silent helicopter. Its rotors hung motionless against the sky, waiting. Broken. But not beyond repair. Nothing was ever beyond repair. Papa Joe had taught him that. "I accept." The 2 words cut through the flight deck noise like a knife. The laughter died. The smirks faded. Something shifted in the air. Something that made Ashford's confidence flicker for just a moment. "Excuse me." "I accept your terms, sir. Fix the helicopter by dawn, get your recommendation. Fail, and I'm gone." Marcus held out his hand. Ashford stared at it like it was a snake. For a long moment, nothing happened. The wind blew. The waves crashed against the carrier's hull, and 2 men faced each other in a standoff that would determine both their futures. Finally, Ashford laughed again. But this time, something was different about it. Something hollow. "Have it your way, recruit." He didn't shake Marcus's hand. "You have until 0600 tomorrow. That's—" He checked his watch. About 20 hours. Better get started. He turned and walked away, taking most of his officers with him. The crowd began to disperse, conversations buzzing with speculation and bets being placed on the outcome. Marcus stood alone beside the helicopter. 20 hours to do the impossible. 20 hours to save his career, his future, and maybe, just maybe, prove that he was more than what they saw when they looked at his skin. He placed his hand on the engine housing again, closed his eyes, and for the first time in 4 months, Marcus Cole smiled. The first hour was the hardest, not because of the work, but because of the watching. Every mechanic on the flight deck found a reason to linger nearby. Every officer on the ship seemed to need something from the aviation section. Even sailors from other departments wandered by, trying to catch a glimpse of the recruit who'd challenged Ashford. Marcus ignored them all. He circled the helicopter slowly the way Papa Joe had taught him. Not touching, not yet, just observing. Listening with more than his ears. Every machine tells a story, his grandfather used to say. You just have to be patient enough to hear it. Marcus let his fingers trail along the fuselage. Cold metal, salt residue from ocean air, the subtle vibrations of a ship that never stopped moving. But underneath all that, something else, something wrong. He paused at the tail rotor assembly, listened. The wind whistled through the blades. Ordinary sound, but underneath it barely audible, a resonance that didn't belong. Like a guitar string tuned slightly flat. Marcus pulled out his phone and opened an app he'd downloaded 3 years ago. Basic acoustic analysis. The kind of tool auto mechanics use to diagnose engine problems by sound. The kind of tool his grandfather would have called cheating. I'll take every advantage I can get, Papa Joe. He held the phone near the tail rotor housing and activated the microphone. Numbers scrolled across the screen. Frequency analysis. Harmonic patterns. The math that turned sound into data. 340 Hz. Marcus frowned. The MH-60R's tail rotor gearbox should produce a primary frequency of 285 Hz under normal conditions. He'd memorized that number during one of his endless nights of studying schematics that nobody asked him to study. A 55 Hz deviation wasn't huge. A civilian mechanic might dismiss it. But Marcus knew better. 55 Hz was a scream. Rodriguez. The senior chief looked up from his diagnostic station, surprise flickering across his face. None of the recruits ever addressed him directly. What is it, Cole? Your computers, they check the tail rotor gearbox. Rodriguez hesitated. The question was legitimate. Professional. Not what he'd expected from a janitor playing mechanic. 3 times. Shows normal across the board. Check it again and look for debris signature. Debris. Rodriguez frowned. FOD inspection came back clean. Microscopic debris. The kind visual inspection misses. For a long moment, Rodriguez didn't move. Then something shifted in his expression. Curiosity, maybe, or just the desperation of a man who'd been staring at an impossible problem for 12 hours. Give me a minute. He turned back to his station and started typing commands Marcus couldn't see. The crowd had thinned slightly. Most of the casual observers had gotten bored and drifted away. But the serious ones remained the mechanics who actually cared about the outcome. Watching Marcus work with expressions that ranged from skeptical to hopeful. Martinez, a third-generation Navy man with grease under his fingernails and doubt in his eyes, sidled up beside him. You really think you can fix this thing? Marcus didn't look up from his phone. I know I can. How, you haven't even opened a panel yet? Don't need to, not yet. Martinez snorted. That's not how mechanics works, Boot. You can't diagnose a gearbox by staring at it. I'm not staring at it. Marcus finally met his eyes. I'm listening to it. Before Martinez could respond, Rodriguez's voice cut across the deck. Holy shit! Marcus turned. The senior chief was staring at his screen like it had just shown him the face of God. "What did you find?" Rodriguez looked up at Marcus with an expression that was half confusion, half something that might have been respect. "Microscopic metallic particles. The computer flagged them as within normal parameters, but when I ran a secondary filter..." He shook his head. "They're not supposed to be there, and they're concentrated in exactly the area you identified, the tail rotor gearbox." The flight deck went quiet again. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. He wasn't crazy. He hadn't imagined the sound. The helicopter really was trying to tell its story, and he was the only one who'd been listening. "What does that mean?" Martinez asked, his skepticism fading. "It means there's debris in the gearbox," Marcus said. "Microscopic fragments, probably from a worn bearing or a contaminated lubricant batch. Small enough to pass through filters, too small to show on visual inspection, but big enough to throw off the harmonic balance and trigger the safety system." He turned to Rodriguez. "Your computer didn't find the problem because it was looking for something broken. This isn't broken, it's just out of tune." Rodriguez was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "How did you know?" "Because my grandfather taught me that machines always tell the truth. You just have to know how to listen." Word reached Commander Ashford within the hour. He was in the officer's wardroom enjoying coffee with two lieutenants who laughed at his jokes whether they were funny or not when his aide appeared at the door. "Sir, you might want to come to the flight deck." "The recruit giving up already?" Ashford smiled. "That was faster than I expected." "No, sir, he's..." The aide hesitated. "He found something." Ashford's smile faded. He set down his coffee without looking at it and walked to the flight deck with steps that got faster as he got closer. What he found when he arrived made his stomach clench. Marcus Cole stood beside the helicopter surrounded by a circle of mechanics who were actually listening to him. Rodriguez was at his side pointing at diagnostic screens that showed data Ashford couldn't interpret. "Reverse flow procedure," Marcus was saying. "We use the helicopter's own hydraulic system to flush the debris from the gearbox without full disassembly. The pressure differential." "What the hell is going on here?" The crowd parted as Ashford pushed through. His face had gone red in a way that had nothing to do with the tropical sun. "Rodriguez, report." The senior chief straightened. "Sir, Recruit Cole identified the source of the malfunction. Microscopic debris in the tail rotor gearbox. Computer missed it because the particles were individually within tolerance, but collectively, they're throwing off the harmonic balance." "Microscopic debris." Ashford's voice dripped with derision. "And how exactly did a janitor find what my computers couldn't?" "Acoustic analysis, sir." Rodriguez hesitated, then continued. "He heard it." "He heard it." "Yes, sir." Ashford turned to Marcus. The hatred in his eyes was almost physical. "This is your expert diagnosis vibrations that only you can hear. It's not magic, sir." Marcus kept his voice even. "It's physics. Every mechanical system produces acoustic signatures. When those signatures deviate from normal parameters, it indicates a problem. The human ear, properly trained, can detect variations that digital systems filter out as noise." "And where exactly did you receive this training?" "From my grandfather, Joseph Coleman. He was a helicopter mechanic in Vietnam." Something flickered across Ashford's face. The name meant nothing to him, but the claim itself was annoying, the suggestion that some old man from the swamps had taught this recruit something his Navy training had missed. "Vietnam." Ashford laughed, but it sounded forced. "So your grandfather worked on helicopters 50 years ago, and that makes you qualified to diagnose modern aircraft?" "The principles haven't changed, sir. Metal still resonates. Bearings still wear. Sound still tells the truth." Ashford stepped closer. His voice dropped low enough that only Marcus could hear. "I don't know what game you're playing, boy, but I promise you this. When you fail, and you will fail, I'm going to make sure you never set foot on a flight deck again. Not on this ship. Not on any ship. You'll spend the rest of your miserable enlistment counting inventory in a warehouse so far from civilization that God himself couldn't find you." Marcus met his eyes. "Then I guess I better not fail, sir." The moment stretched. Two men, one wearing the symbols of authority earned through years of service, the other wearing nothing but conviction. Ashford broke first. "You have until 0600. He turned and walked away, shoulders rigid with barely contained rage. Not 1 minute more. Marcus watched him go. Then he turned back to Rodriguez. "Senior Chief, I'm going to need access to the hydraulic system controls, and I need to run some calculations before we start the flush procedure." Rodriguez nodded slowly. The skepticism hadn't completely left his face, but it was fighting a losing battle against something else. Hope. "What do you need?" Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "Everything you've got." The next 8 hours were the longest of Marcus's life. He worked through the equations 3 times, checking and rechecking the pressure calculations. The reverse flush procedure wasn't standard. It wasn't in any manual. It was an idea born from desperation and instinct, and the memory of watching Papa Joe perform miracles in a Louisiana garage. If he was wrong, if the pressure was too high, or the timing was off, he'd destroy the gearbox completely. A $40 million helicopter would become scrap metal. And his career would end not with a whimper, but with a catastrophic failure broadcast to the entire ship. No pressure. Martinez brought him coffee around midnight. The skeptical mechanic had been watching Marcus work for hours, his expression slowly shifting from doubt to something that looked almost like faith. "You really think this is going to work?" Marcus took the coffee gratefully. His hands were steady, but his nerves were screaming. "It has to work." "That's not an answer." "No." Marcus took a sip. The coffee was bitter and lukewarm. "Perfect." "It's not." Martinez sat down beside him. The flight deck was quiet now. Most of the crew had gone to their racks, leaving only a skeleton watch and the handful of mechanics who'd become invested in the outcome. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus nodded. "Why do you care so much about helicopters, I mean? You could be anywhere, doing anything. Why this?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The memories rose up unbidden. "When I was 9 years old, my grandfather pulled me out of school one day. Didn't tell me why. Just drove me to this hangar outside of town, where they kept old military helicopters. Hueys mostly. Relics from Vietnam." He stared at the Seahawk, but what he saw was 40 years away. "There was this one helicopter. The owner said it was dead. Engine hadn't run in 20 years. Everyone told him to scrap it. But my grandfather, he just smiled and asked for a day with it. What happened? He fixed it." Marcus's voice softened. "I watched him work for 16 hours straight. No fancy computers, no diagnostic equipment. Just his hands and his ears and 60 years of listening to machines. And it flew. It flew." Marcus turned to face Martinez. "That's when I knew what I wanted to do with my life. Not just fix things. Anyone can learn to fix things. I wanted to understand them, the way my grandfather understood them, to hear what they were trying to say." Martinez was quiet for a long moment. "Your grandfather sounds like a hell of a man." "He was." Marcus finished his coffee. "He is." He stood up, stretching muscles that had cramped from hours of calculations. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a helicopter to talk to." At 0430, Marcus was ready. The flight deck was bathed in the gray light that comes just before dawn. The eastern horizon showed the faintest hint of gold, a promise that the sun was coming, whether the world was ready or not. A small crowd had gathered. Word had spread through the ship that the recruit's moment of truth was approaching. Sailors found excuses to be on deck. Even officers who pretended not to care managed to position themselves where they could see. Commander Ashford stood at the front arms, crossed face set, in an expression of patient anticipation. He looked like a man waiting for Christmas morning. Rodriguez stood beside Marcus at the helicopter's control panel. You sure about this? Marcus's hands hovered over the controls. The procedure was locked in. The calculations checked out. Everything was ready. But sure, no. He wasn't sure. He'd never be sure. Let's find out. He initiated the sequence. The helicopter's hydraulic system whined to life. Pumps that normally pushed fluid in one direction began the complex dance of controlled reversal. Pressure built in chambers designed for entirely different purposes. Numbers scrolled across the diagnostic display. Pressure readings, temperature gauges, the mathematical language of mechanical systems under stress. Pressure at 40%, Rodriguez called out. 50, 60. Marcus watched the numbers climb. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. 70%, 75. The helicopter groaned. Metal protested against forces it wasn't designed to handle. 80%, 85. Someone in the crowd whispered a prayer. 90%. Marcus's finger hovered over the abort button. One more second. Just one more. 95. Now. He triggered the release. The sound that followed was unlike anything the flight deck had ever heard. A deep, shuddering pulse that seemed to come from the helicopter's very soul. Air and fluid and force moving in directions that defied normal operation. The diagnostic screens flickered. Numbers went haywire. For one terrible moment, Marcus was certain he'd destroyed everything. Then the numbers stabilized. Rodriguez's voice came out as a whisper. Harmonic frequency. 287 hertz. Within 2 hertz of perfect specification. The gearbox was clean. Mother of God, Martinez breathed. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Now comes the real test. He moved to the pilot's station and began the startup sequence. Behind him, the crowd pressed closer. Even Ashford had taken a step forward, his confident expression beginning to crack. The engines began their spin-up cycle, turbines catching, fuel igniting, the massive rotor blades starting to turn. For 3 endless seconds, nothing happened. Then the Seahawk roared to life. The rotors spun up to full speed. The engine note was pure, clean, perfect. The harmonic distortion that had grounded the aircraft was gone, flushed away by a procedure that no manual had ever documented. The diagnostic screen showed all green. Full operational capacity. Rodriguez announced, his voice cracking. All systems nominal. The flight deck erupted. Mechanics who'd never spoken to Marcus before were slapping his back, shaking his hand. Rodriguez was grinning like a kid on his birthday. Even the officers were nodding with something that looked like respect. But Marcus wasn't looking at any of them. He was looking at Commander Ashford. The man's face had gone pale. His confident posture had crumbled into something smaller. Something frightened. He was staring at the helicopter like it had personally betrayed him. Sir. Marcus's voice carried across the deck. I believe we had an agreement. Ashford didn't respond. A recommendation for officer training, a letter to the academy. Marcus paused. And a marriage proposal, if I remember correctly. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Ashford's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Before he could speak, a new voice cut through the noise. What exactly is going on here? The crowd parted to reveal a woman in flight gear, her face weathered by years of service, her collar insignia marking her as Senior Chief Petty Officer. Elena Reyes. She surveyed the scene, a helicopter running perfectly that had been dead 12 hours ago. A crowd of excited sailors, a recruit standing tall, and a commander who looked like he wanted to disappear. Someone want to explain why my helicopter is running, and my CO looks like he's seen a ghost. Rodriguez stepped forward. Senior Chief Recruit Cole diagnosed and repaired the gearbox malfunction. Commander Ashford had offered certain incentives for success. Reyes's eyes moved to Marcus, and something in her expression shifted. Recognition. Cole. She said the name slowly. From Louisiana. Yes, ma'am. Joseph Coleman's grandson. Marcus blinked. You knew my grandfather. My father flew with him in Vietnam. Reyes's voice softened. Sergeant Carlos Reyes, your grandfather saved his life 3 times, kept his Huey flying when everyone said it was impossible. She looked at the running helicopter, then back at Marcus. Looks like the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Behind her, Commander Ashford finally found his voice. This proves nothing. Anyone could have... Commander. Reyes cut him off. Her voice was ice. I suggest you return to your quarters. I'm going to need a full report on how exactly one of my mechanics was assigned to janitorial duty, despite having test scores that exceed half our officers. Ashford's face went from pale to red. I don't answer to you, Senior Chief. No, Reyes smiled. It wasn't friendly. But you answer to Admiral Morrison. And he answers to my uncle. The color drained from Ashford's face again. This isn't over, he said, but his voice had lost its edge. He turned and walked away, dignity in tatters, surrounded by the whispers of sailors who'd just watched him humiliated by the recruit he'd tried to destroy. Marcus watched him go. Then he felt Reyes's hand on his shoulder. You did good work today, Cole. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me yet. Her expression was serious. Ashford isn't going to take this lying down. You've made a powerful enemy. Marcus looked at the helicopter. His helicopter now in a way. The machine that had spoken to him when no one else was listening. I've had enemies before, ma'am. Not like this. Maybe not. Marcus met her eyes. But I've also never had this much to fight for. Reyes studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Get some sleep, Cole. Something tells me tomorrow is going to be a long day. Marcus didn't argue. He was exhausted. His muscles ached. His mind was buzzing with adrenaline and relief and 100 other emotions he couldn't name. But as he walked off the flight deck, leaving the running helicopter behind, one thought kept circling in his head. This wasn't the end of anything. It was just the beginning. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Marcus lay in his rack staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of a ship that never truly rested. The hum of ventilation. The distant thrum of engines. The occasional footsteps of sailors moving through passageways on watch. His body was exhausted, but his mind refused to quiet. He kept seeing Ashford's face. That moment when confidence had cracked into something uglier. The look of a man who'd been humiliated in front of his subordinates and was already planning revenge. Senior Chief Reyes was right. This wasn't over. Around 0200, Marcus gave up trying to sleep. He pulled on his boots and made his way to the small compartment that served as the ship's library. A few metal shelves bolted to the wall. Dog-eared paperbacks that had passed through 100 hands. A single desk with a lamp that flickered when the ship rolled. He sat down and pulled out the letter he carried everywhere. The paper was soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. The handwriting was shaky. The letters formed by hands that had once rebuilt helicopter engines with surgical precision, but now struggled to hold a pen. Papa Joe had written it 3 months ago, just before Marcus shipped out. Boy. The letter began, because Papa Joe had never called him anything else. By the time you read this, you'll be on that big ship doing whatever it is the Navy thinks you should be doing. Probably something that doesn't use half of what I taught you. That's okay. The world has a way of putting people in boxes that don't fit. Your job is to prove the box wrong. Marcus had read those words 100 times. They never got old. Remember what I told you about machines. They don't lie. They don't play politics. They don't care what color your skin is or where you went to school. A machine will tell you the truth if you're patient enough to listen. People are harder. People lie to themselves most of all. But if you can learn to hear what a machine is really saying, you can learn to hear what people aren't saying too. The next paragraph was the one that always made his chest tight. I'm proud of you, boy. Prouder than I've ever been of anything in my life. Your mama raised you right after your daddy passed. She gave you the heart. I just gave you the hands. Now go out there and show them what a Cole can do. Marcus folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into his pocket. Papa Joe was 83 years old now, living in a nursing home outside Baton Rouge because the diabetes had taken his legs and the years had taken everything else. But his mind was still sharp, still filled with stories about Vietnam and helicopters and the men who'd flown them into places no sane person would go. Marcus had called him the night before shipping out. "You scared, boy?" "Yes, sir." "Good." Papa Joe's laugh had crackled through the phone line. "Only fools ain't scared. Fear means you're paying attention, means you know the stakes. The trick is doing what needs doing anyway." What if they don't let me do anything? What if they just see? Marcus had trailed off, unable to finish. What if they just see a black boy from the bayou who don't know his place? Yeah. Papa Joe had been quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, older, heavier. "Let me tell you something I never told you before. When I got to Vietnam in 1968, I was the only black mechanic in my unit. The pilots didn't want me touching their birds. The other mechanics didn't want me in their shop. My CO told me straight to my face that he didn't think colored boys had the brains for helicopter engines." "What did you do?" "I did my job. Day after day, night after night. I fixed what they couldn't fix. I kept birds flying that everyone else said were dead. And eventually they stopped seeing my skin. They just saw the work. And that was enough." "No." Papa Joe's voice had hardened. "It wasn't nearly enough. Some of them never came around. Some of them hated me until the day they rotated home. But here's the thing, boy. I didn't do it for them. I did it because those helicopters were carrying American soldiers into combat. Black soldiers, white soldiers. Didn't matter. They were all bleeding the same color when things went wrong. So I fixed the birds, and I kept my mouth shut, and I let my hands do the talking." Marcus had carried that conversation with him every day since. Now, sitting in the ship's library at 2 in the morning, he wondered if Papa Joe had ever felt as alone as he felt right now. The door opened behind him. Marcus turned to find Senior Chief Reyes standing in the doorway. She was still in her flight suit, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she hadn't slept either. "Couldn't sleep." "No, ma'am." Reyes sat down across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I wasn't lying earlier," she finally said, "about my father, Carlos Reyes. He flew Hueys in Vietnam from 68 to 71, 3 tours. And he knew my grandfather, knew him." Reyes smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "Your grandfather saved his life, multiple times. The first time was during a medevac mission near Quezon. Son. Dad's helicopter took ground fire engine started failing. Everyone said ditch it, but your grandfather climbed up on that bird while it was still smoking and found the problem. Some kind of fuel line issue. Fixed it with wire and willpower while bullets were flying." Marcus felt something warm spread through his chest. Pride. The deep kind that has nothing to do with ego. "He never told me that story." "He wouldn't. Your grandfather wasn't the type to brag." Reyes leaned forward. "But my father told it. Over and over. Right up until he passed in 2015. He said Big Joe Coleman was the best mechanic he ever saw. Said the man could hear things in an engine that no one else could hear." "That's what he taught me." "I know." Reyes studied him with eyes that had seen too much. "I knew who you were the moment I heard your name. I pulled your file 6 weeks ago." Marcus blinked. "You pulled my file?" "I wanted to know why someone with your test scores was scrubbing toilets." Her jaw tightened. "Ashford's been blocking qualified minorities from advancement positions for years. He's careful about it. Never puts anything in writing, but the pattern is clear if you know where to look." "Why didn't you do anything?" "Politics." The word came out bitter. "Ashford has connections. His father was an admiral. His brother-in-law sits on the Armed Services Committee. Taking him on without proof would have ended my career, not his." "So you just watched?" "I documented." Reyes's eyes met his. "Every time he passed over someone qualified in favor of someone less capable, Every racist comment that got reported and then buried. Every promising sailor who got transferred to nowhere because they didn't fit his image of what Navy personnel should look like. She pulled a small notebook from her flight suit pocket. 3 years of documentation, names, dates, patterns, everything I need to build a case. But you never filed it. Never had proof that couldn't be explained away. Reyes tucked the notebook back into her pocket. Until tonight. Marcus understood. Ashford's challenge. Everything he said. People recorded it. Dozens of recordings from multiple angles. His own words in front of witnesses. Calling you boy. Referencing your welfare degree. Making promises he never intended to keep because he assumed you'd fail. Reyes smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. You didn't just fix that helicopter, Cole. You gave me the evidence I've been waiting 3 years to get. Marcus let that sink in. The weight of it. The implications. What happens now? Now I file a formal complaint. Admiral Morrison arrives in 4 days for the inspection. By then, I'll have a report on his desk that he can't ignore. And Ashford. Reyes's expression hardened. Ashford is going to have a very bad week. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Get some sleep, Cole. You've earned it. Ma'am? Yeah. Thank you. For watching, for documenting. Even when you couldn't do anything. Reyes was quiet for a moment. My father used to say that justice isn't about one big moment. It's about all the small moments that lead up to it. Every person who keeps records when they could look away. Every witness who remembers what they saw. That's what makes justice possible. She opened the door. Your grandfather taught you how to hear what machines are saying. Maybe it's time you learn to hear what people are saying too. Then she was gone, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and his grandfather's letter and the growing certainty that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't predict. 3 decks up, Commander Ashford wasn't sleeping either. He sat in his stateroom staring at the bulkhead, replaying the flight deck confrontation over and over in his mind. The recruit's face. Calm, confident, completely unafraid. The helicopter roaring to life. The sound of his own humiliation broadcast to every corner of the ship. Rodriguez looking at Cole like he was some kind of messiah. And worst of all, Reyes. Senior Chief Elena Reyes, who'd been a thorn in his side since she'd arrived 2 years ago, looking at him with those knowing eyes, mentioning Admiral Morrison like a threat. Ashford picked up the glass of whiskey on his desk and drained it. He'd worked too hard to get here. Too many years of playing politics. Too many favors called in. Too many competitors quietly undermined. This command was supposed to be his stepping stone to Admiral. The NATO inspection was supposed to cement his reputation, and now some bayou mechanic with a community college degree had made him look like a fool. His phone buzzed. A text from Lieutenant Commander Davis, his most loyal subordinate. Sir, you should see this. A link followed. Ashford clicked it. Video. Flight deck footage from multiple angles already spreading through the ship's informal networks. Him grabbing Cole's collar. Him making the marriage joke. Him watching his face fall as the helicopter started. The comments were brutal. Did you see his face when it actually worked? Karma's a beautiful thing. Someone should send this to his Admiral Daddy. Ashford threw his phone across the room. It hit the bulkhead and clattered to the deck screen, cracking but still glowing with the video that was destroying his reputation frame by frame. He had to do something. Had to regain control. Had to remind everyone on this ship why they should fear him more than they respected some recruit who got lucky. But what filing charges against Cole was too obvious. The recordings made that impossible anyway. Any formal action would look like retaliation, which Reyes would use against him. Transferring Cole off the ship would raise questions. The recruit had too many eyes on him now, too much attention from people who might ask uncomfortable questions. No. He needed something subtler, something that would destroy Cole without leaving fingerprints. Ashford retrieved his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Commander Patricia Walsh. Personnel reassignment. She owed him a favor from 3 years ago when he'd made a harassment complaint against her disappear. Time to collect. The next morning, Marcus woke to find the ship transformed. Word of his success had spread through every deck, every compartment, every mess hall and berthing space. Sailors he'd never met nodded at him in passageways. Mechanics who'd ignored him for months stopped to shake his hand. Even officers who'd looked through him like he was invisible now met his eyes. Rodriguez found him during breakfast. "You're famous, Cole." "I fixed a helicopter. That's my job." "No." Rodriguez sat down across from him, voice low. "You embarrassed Ashford in front of the entire crew. That's not just a job. That's a declaration of war." "I didn't want a war." "Doesn't matter what you wanted." Rodriguez glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "Ashford isn't going to let this go. He can't. His whole identity is built on being the smartest, most capable person in any room. You proved him wrong in front of witnesses. Men like him don't forget that. What do you think he'll do?" "Nothing obvious. He's too smart for that." Rodriguez pushed his food around his plate. "But watch your back, Cole. And watch who's watching you." As if on cue, Martinez appeared at their table. The skeptical mechanic from yesterday looked different now. Something had shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe. Or something close to it. "Cole. Briefing in 30 minutes. Senior Chief wants you there." "Me? For what?" "Didn't say." Martinez hesitated. "Look, I owe you an apology. I didn't think you could do it. I was wrong." Marcus studied him for a moment. "You weren't the only one." "No, but I should have known better." Martinez's jaw tightened. "My grandfather was a Tuskegee mechanic. Different war, same story. Guys like us have been proving ourselves twice as hard for twice as long. I forgot that for a while." He extended his hand. Marcus shook it. Something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, the silent bond of men who knew what it meant to be underestimated. 30 minutes, Martinez repeated. "Don't be late." The briefing room was full when Marcus arrived. Senior Chief Reyes stood at the front, her expression grave. A dozen pilots and mechanics filled the seats, including some faces Marcus had never seen before. Reyes nodded at him as he entered. "Cole, take a seat." He found an empty chair near the back, conscious of the eyes following him. "All right, listen up." Reyes activated the screen behind her. A satellite image appeared. Weather patterns, storm cells, the distinctive spiral of a massive typhoon. As of 0400 this morning, Typhoon May has accelerated faster than predicted. It's now Category 4 and tracking directly toward our operational area. The room stirred. Typhoons were serious business for carrier operations. That's not the problem. Reyes clicked to another image. A small vessel civilian surrounded by angry ocean. This is the research vessel Coral Dawn. 23 scientists aboard conducting marine biology research in the Philippine Sea. They were supposed to evacuate yesterday, but their engine failed. They're dead in the water directly in the typhoon's path. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Rescue attempts by Philippine Coast Guard have failed. Weather's too rough for their helicopters. The only aircraft in range with the capability to perform this extraction, she paused, is our MH-60R Seahawk. Every eye in the room turned to Marcus, the helicopter he'd fixed. "We launch in 14 hours, Reyes continued. "That gives us a narrow window before the typhoon makes extraction impossible. This is a volunteer mission. The conditions will be dangerous. I won't order anyone to fly into that storm." She looked directly at Marcus. "I need a flight engineer, someone who knows that helicopter inside and out, someone who can keep it running no matter what happens up there." The room was silent. Marcus thought about the risk, the storm, the 23 people who would die if no one helped them. He thought about Papa Joe's letter. Go out there and show them what a Cole can do. I volunteer. Reyes nodded like she'd expected nothing else. Martinez, your co-pilot. Martinez stood. Yes, ma'am. Rodriguez, you'll coordinate from the deck. I'll be flying the bird myself. Rodriguez straightened. Understood. Everyone else, I need this ship ready for rough weather operations. Dismissed. The room emptied quickly, sailors moving with the urgent energy of people who finally had a mission that mattered. Reyes caught Marcus before he could leave. You understand what you just signed up for? Yes, ma'am. This isn't fixing an engine in a hangar. We'll be flying into conditions that push aircraft beyond their limits. If something fails up there, there's no backup, no second chances. I understand. Reyes studied him. Your grandfather ever tell you about the mission at Quezon? The one where he saved my father? No, ma'am. He doesn't talk about the war much. My father did. He said the weather was terrible that day. Fog so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Enemy fire coming from every direction. Most pilots would have turned back. Most mechanics would have said the bird couldn't fly. She leaned closer. But your grandfather told my father that the helicopter wanted to fly, that it was ready, that all they had to do was trust it. She straightened. 23 people are going to die if we don't reach them. I need to know that helicopter is ready. Marcus thought about the Seahawk, the way it had roared to life after he'd flushed the debris, the clean, pure sound of an engine running exactly as it should. The helicopter is ready, ma'am. Good. Reyes turned to leave. Get some rest. We launch at 1800. But rest was impossible. Marcus spent the next 6 hours going over every system on the Seahawk, checking and rechecking, running diagnostics, listening to the engine with his eyes closed, searching for any hint of trouble. The helicopter spoke to him in the language his grandfather had taught him. Metal and air and fuel and fire all combining into a voice that told the truth. The bird was ready. The question was whether he was. Around 1400, his phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. Check your quarters. Something you need to see. Marcus frowned. Probably spam, or a prank from one of the sailors who'd been following his story. But something made him go anyway. His rack was in a berthing compartment with 40 other sailors, not exactly private. He pulled back the curtain expecting to find nothing. Instead, he found an envelope on his pillow. Inside was a single piece of paper, official Navy letterhead, transfer orders, his name, his service number, reassignment to naval support activity, Thule, Greenland. Effective immediately upon completion of current operations. Greenland. The most remote, most isolated posting in the entire Navy. The place where careers went to die. At the bottom of the page, a signature. Commander Patricia Walsh. Personnel reassignment. Below that, handwritten in neat script. Promise kept. R.A. R.A. Richard Ashford. Marcus stared at the paper for a long moment. His hands were shaking, but not from fear. Anger, pure and hot and demanding release. Ashford wasn't even trying to hide it. The handwritten initials were a taunt, a message, a reminder that no matter what Marcus accomplished, Ashford had the power to make it meaningless. For a moment, Marcus considered confronting him. Marching to the commander's stateroom and demanding an explanation, making enough noise that someone would have to pay attention. But then he heard Papa Joe's voice in his head. They want you, angry boy. Angry men make mistakes. Angry men give them excuses. You want to beat them? Stay cold. Stay focused. Let your work speak for you. Marcus folded the transfer orders and put them in his pocket. He had a mission to fly. 23 lives to save. Everything else could wait. At 17:30, Marcus stood on the flight deck in full flight gear, watching the Seahawk being prepared for launch. The sky had darkened over the past few hours. Not sunset dark, storm dark. The edge of Typhoon May was already churning the ocean into whitecaps that crashed against the carrier's hull. Martinez appeared beside him. You ready for this? Ready as I'll ever be. I've been flying for 12 years. Never seen weather like what we're heading into. Martinez adjusted his helmet. You scared? Terrified. Good. Martinez almost smiled. Your grandfather would be proud. Before Marcus could respond, Rodriguez jogged over with a tablet. Final weather update. The window's narrower than we thought. We'll have maybe 40 minutes at the extraction site before conditions become impossible. 40 minutes. Marcus absorbed that. How long to reach the Coral Dawn? 2 hours in these conditions. Maybe more if we hit headwinds. 4 hours round trip assuming everything went perfectly. In a typhoon, nothing went perfectly. Reyes emerged from the ready room already in her flight suit. Her face was calm, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. All right, listen up. This is a simple extraction that's going to be anything but simple. 23 civilians, most of them scientists who've never seen combat conditions. They're going to be scared, disoriented. Some might be injured from the rough seas. She looked at each of them in turn. Our job is to get them off that ship and back to this deck alive, whatever it takes, whatever we have to do. Questions. Silence. Then let's go save some lives. They climbed into the Seahawk. Marcus took his position at the flight engineer station, surrounded by gauges and monitors that would tell him everything he needed to know about the helicopter's health. Reyes ran through the pre-flight checklist with mechanical precision. Each system reporting nominal. Each backup functioning as designed. Cole, how's she feeling? Marcus closed his eyes. Listened. The engine's voice was strong and steady, ready for whatever lay ahead. She's good, ma'am. Better than good. Then let's fly. The rotors spun up. The deck crew gave the signal, and the Seahawk lifted into a sky that was already angry. Marcus watched the carrier fall away beneath them, an island of steel in an ocean that was rapidly becoming hostile. Behind them, Commander Ashford stood at the observation deck, watching the helicopter disappear into the storm. His face betrayed nothing, but in his pocket, his phone held a draft message to Commander Walsh. If Cole doesn't come back from this mission, the transfer orders won't be necessary. He hadn't sent it. Not yet. But as the Seahawk vanished into the clouds, Ashford found himself hoping that the storm would do what he couldn't. Some problems, after all, solved themselves. The first hour of flight tested everything Marcus had ever learned. The Seahawk bucked and shuddered through turbulence that felt like being inside a washing machine. Rain hammered the windscreen so hard that visibility dropped to nothing. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating clouds that looked like mountains made of fury. Airspeed dropping, Martinez called out. Headwinds stronger than predicted. Compensating. Reyes's hands were steady on the controls. Coal status. Marcus studied his instruments. Engine temperature slightly elevated. Transmission oil pressure nominal. Main rotor speed consistent. But underneath the data, he heard something else. A subtle change in the engine's voice. Not wrong exactly, just strained. She's working hard, ma'am. Running hot, but within limits. Keep me posted. The helicopter climbed higher, trying to find smoother air above the worst of the turbulence. For a few minutes, the ride improved. Then they hit another wall of wind and everything went sideways. Gust. Gust. Martinez grabbed his restraints as the Seahawk tilted 45 degrees. Reyes fought the controls. I've got it! I've got it! The helicopter leveled out. Marcus's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it over the engine noise. Everyone okay? Reyes's voice was steady despite what had just happened. Still here, Martinez replied. Cole? Fine, ma'am. Marcus forced himself to focus on his instruments instead of his fear. Engines holding, but we need to watch the transmission temperature. Another gust like that and we might overheat. Noted. They flew on into the darkness. Somewhere ahead, 23 people were waiting to be saved. And somewhere behind a man was waiting for them to fail. Marcus thought about the transfer orders in his pocket. about Ashford's petty revenge, about all the ways powerful men had tried to break his family for generations. Then he thought about Papa Joe, about Vietnam, about helicopters that flew when everyone said they couldn't. The storm raged around them, but Marcus Cole was exactly where he needed to be. The second hour was worse. Marcus had stopped looking at the clock 20 minutes ago. Time didn't matter anymore. Only the helicopter mattered. Only the engine's voice growing more strained with each mile they pushed deeper into the typhoon. "Transmission temperature climbing," he called out. 92% of redline. "How long before we hit limits?" Reyes asked without taking her eyes off the instruments. "At this rate, 20 minutes, maybe less." Martinez swore under his breath. "We're still 40 minutes from the Coral Dawn." "Then we need to slow down." Reyes adjusted the collective. "Reduce power, let her cool. If we slow down, we'll miss the extraction window. If we burn out the transmission, we won't extract anyone." The helicopter shuddered as another gust hit them broadside. Marcus grabbed his console, steadying himself while his eyes stayed locked on the temperature gauge. 93%. His mind raced through options. The Seahawk's transmission was designed for extreme conditions, but not this extreme. Not sustained combat power in hurricane-force winds. The oil was heating faster than the cooling system could handle. Then he heard it. A subtle change in the transmission's pitch. The same kind of change Papa Joe had taught him to recognize in car engines 40 years simpler than this. "Wait," Marcus said. "Hold current speed." "Cole the temperature." "I know. Just give me 30 seconds." He closed his eyes, listened past the roar of wind and rain, past the thunder of rotors, down into the mechanical heart of the helicopter, where metal and oil and physics combined into something almost alive. The transmission was talking to him, not overheating from power output. The temperature spike wasn't about how hard they were flying, it was about how they were flying. "Change your angle of attack," Marcus said suddenly. Reyes frowned. "What?" "We're fighting the wind head-on. The transmission is working harder because we're forcing it to compensate for turbulence. If you climb another 500 feet and angle 15 degrees northeast, we'll catch the outer rotation of the storm. The wind will work with us instead of against us." Martinez turned in his seat. "That'll add 10 miles to our route. But we'll get there with a working transmission. Trust me." Reyes was quiet for a long moment. The helicopter bucked again. Rain hammered the windscreen like 1,000 angry fists. "Cole, if you're wrong." "I'm not wrong." Marcus met her eyes in the mirror. "The helicopter told me." Another pilot would have laughed. Another pilot would have trusted instruments over intuition. But Reyes had grown up on stories about Big Joe Coleman, about a mechanic who heard things in engines that no one else could hear. She pulled back on the stick and climbed. The Seahawk rose through layers of turbulence. The battering eased slightly, and then like magic the wind shifted. Instead of pushing against them, it pushed with them. "Ground speed increasing," Martinez reported, surprise evident in his voice. "We're making up time." "Transmission temperature." Marcus watched the gauge. 92%. 91. 90. "Cooling down. We're good." Reyes allowed herself a small smile. "Your grandfather teach you that too." "He taught me that machines want to work. We just have to stop fighting them." They flew on through the storm, the helicopter finally singing in harmony with the weather instead of screaming against it. But they weren't safe yet, not even close. The Coral Dawn appeared on radar 47 minutes later. "Contact," Martinez announced. "Bearing 270, 12 miles. She's drifting fast." "Visual." Reyes leaned forward, trying to see through the wall of rain. "Negative. Visibility's down to half a mile." Marcus pulled up the research vessel's specifications on his tablet. Small ship. 120 feet. Designed for calm water scientific research, not typhoon survival. The fact that it was still afloat was a miracle. Coral Dawn, this is Navy Rescue 77. Reyes transmitted. We have you on radar. What's your status? Static crackled through the headset. Then a voice barely audible over the interference. Navy Rescue, this is Coral Dawn. Thank God. We've got 23 souls aboard, 4 injured. Ship is taking on water. We've lost steering and the engine room is flooded. We're not going to last much longer out here. Copy Coral Dawn. We're 14 minutes out. Begin preparing passengers for aerial extraction. Aerial extraction? The voice on the radio rose with panic. In this weather? How is that even possible? That's our problem, not yours. Just get your people ready. Reyes clicked off the radio and turned to Martinez. What's the sea state? 20-foot swells, maybe higher. Wind gusts to 90 knots. Hover capability. Marginal at best. 1 bad gust and we're in the water. Marcus listened to the exchange, his mind already working through the problem. Standard rescue procedure called for lowering a rescue swimmer on the hoist, then bringing survivors up one at a time. In calm seas, that process took about 2 minutes per person. 23 people at 2 minutes each was 46 minutes. They had maybe 30 minutes before the storm made extraction impossible. We need to go faster, he said. Faster how? Martinez asked. The hoist can only lift 1 person at a time. Not the hoist, the cargo net. Reyes turned in her seat. Cargo net extraction in a typhoon? That's insane. It's the only way to get everyone off in time. Marcus pulled up the helicopter's inventory on his tablet. We have a 12-person cargo net in the bay. We drop it, they load as many people as can fit. We lift them all at once. 3 trips instead of 23. And if the net fails, if someone loses their grip, then they die. But if we do this the normal way, everyone dies when the ship goes down. The helicopter shuddered as they pushed closer to the Coral Dawn. Through gaps in the rain, Marcus caught glimpses of massive waves, their white caps glowing in the helicopter's lights. Reyes was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady. Martinez, prep the cargo net. Cole, I need you on the hoist controls. We're going to do something that's never been done before. Ma'am, the regulations. The regulations assume we have time. Reyes locked eyes with Marcus in the mirror. We don't. Cole's right. This is the only way. Martinez hesitated for just a second. Then he unbuckled and moved to the cargo bay. The Coral Dawn materialized from the storm like a ghost ship. She was listing badly to starboard, waves breaking over her deck, emergency lights flickering through the rain. Marcus could see people crowded at the stern, their bright orange life vests, the only color in a world of gray. Coral Dawn, Navy Rescue 77. We're beginning extraction. We're going to lower a cargo net. Load as many people as can fit and hold on tight. Do you understand? A cargo net. The ship's captain sounded incredulous. In this, it's the fastest way off. Trust us. A pause. Then, understood. We're ready. Reyes brought the helicopter into a hover over the ship's stern. The Seahawk bucked and twisted, fighting to hold position in wind that seemed to come from every direction at once. Opening cargo bay, Martinez reported. Net deployed. Marcus watched through the side window as the orange cargo net descended toward the ship. The wind caught it, sent it swinging wildly. The people on the deck below reached up, trying to grab the flailing netting. 40 feet? Marcus called out. 30. 20. The net touched the deck. Hands grabbed it immediately. Bodies piled on, clinging to the rope mesh like survivors of a shipwreck clinging to driftwood. 8. 9. 10 aboard, Marcus counted. Nets at capacity. Beginning lift. The winch motor whined. The net rose from the deck, 10 people dangling in the howling wind. The helicopter lurched as the additional weight hit. Watch your altitude, Martinez warned. Wave coming. A massive swell rolled toward the Coral Dawn. The ship rose with it, the deck suddenly much closer than it should be. If the net hit the deck during the lift, climb, Marcus shouted. Reyes pulled up hard. The helicopter shot upward just as the wave crested beneath them. The net cleared the deck by less than 5 feet. "Jesus Christ," Martinez breathed. "First group aboard," Marcus announced. "Starting retrieval." The next 3 minutes were controlled chaos. Marcus guided the net into the cargo bay, while Martinez helped the survivors off. Terrified scientists stumbled into the helicopter soaked and shaking, some crying, some silent with shock. "Go! Go!" Martinez shouted once the net was clear. "Second drop." They repeated the process. Another 10 survivors loaded into the net. Another heart-stopping lift through wind and waves. Another near miss with a swell that seemed determined to kill them all. By the time they started the third drop, the Coral Dawn was visibly sinking. "She's going down," Martinez reported. "Stern's underwater." "How many left?" Reyes demanded. Marcus counted the figures on the tilting deck. 3, plus the captain. 4 people. 1 more lift. But as the net descended for the final time, everything went wrong. A gust of wind hit the helicopter like a fist. Reyes fought the controls, but the Seahawk slewed sideways, the cargo net swinging violently over the sinking ship. "I can't hold position," Reyes shouted. Marcus watched in horror as the net slammed into the ship's radio mast. The impact tore a gash in the mesh. Ropes snapped. The net began to come apart. "Net's damaged. We can't use it." On the deck below, the last 4 survivors were scrambling toward the stern as the bow rose higher into the air. In minutes, maybe seconds, the ship would slip beneath the waves. "We have to use the hoist," Marcus said. "One at a time." "There's no time for 4 people." "Then we don't take them one at a time." Marcus was already moving, unbuckling from his station and pushing toward the open cargo bay. The wind hit him like a wall, rain stinging his face, the roar of the storm drowning out everything. "Cole, what are you doing?" "My job." He grabbed the rescue harness and hooked it to the hoist cable. Standard procedure was to send a trained rescue swimmer. Marcus wasn't a rescue swimmer. He'd never even completed the basic training. But he was the only one who could go. "Lower me down." Martinez stared at him. "You're not qualified." "Lower me down, or 4 people die." For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Martinez grabbed the hoist controls. "God help us all." The cable went taut, and Marcus dropped into the storm. The descent was the longest 30 seconds of his life. Wind tore at him, spinning him like a top. Rain blinded him. The cable swayed and jerked as the helicopter fought to maintain position. Below the Coral Dawn was almost vertical now, her stern completely submerged. Marcus hit the deck hard, his boots slipping on the wet surface. A hand grabbed his arm, steadied him. "You're insane," the ship's captain shouted over the storm. "You can't fly us out one at a time." "I know." Marcus looked at the 4 survivors. 3 scientists and the captain, all wearing life vests, all terrified. He unhooked his harness. "Everyone grab the cable. Wrap your arms around it and don't let go. That'll never hold." "It'll hold. The cable's rated for twice our weight. Move." The deck lurched beneath them. The ship was going down. Now, nothing could stop it. They had seconds. Marcus shoved the first scientist toward the cable. "Grab it higher, good." The second scientist. The third. The captain. "Now me." He jumped, wrapping his arms around the cable above the others. 5 bodies dangling from a single line, buffeted by hurricane winds as the ship began its final plunge. Martinez lift. The cable jerked upward. Below them, the Coral Dawn groaned like a dying animal. Her bow rose higher and higher, until she was almost vertical. Then, she slipped beneath the waves. Marcus watched her go, the ship vanishing into the black water, like she'd never existed at all. If they'd been 10 seconds slower. "Keep climbing," he shouted. "Don't look down. Don't let go." The helicopter rose, dragging 5 people through the storm on a cable that was never designed for this. Marcus felt his grip slipping on the wet steel. His arms screamed in protest. The scientists below him were crying, praying, screaming. But they were rising. 20 feet to the bay. Martinez's voice crackled in the wind. Almost there. Marcus looked up, saw the cargo bay opening above them, saw Martinez reaching down, hand extended. 10 feet. 5. The first scientist grabbed Martinez's hand and tumbled into the helicopter. Then the second. The third. The captain. Marcus was last. His arms had gone numb. He couldn't feel his fingers. The only thing keeping him on the cable was pure willpower. "Come on, Cole," Martinez was screaming. "Reach." Marcus let go with one hand and grabbed Martinez's wrist. Felt himself being hauled upward. Then he was in the cargo bay, sprawled on the deck, gasping for breath, alive. Martinez slammed the bay door shut. "All passengers aboard 23 souls recovered. Get us out of here." Reyes didn't need to be told twice. The helicopter banked hard, climbing away from the spot where the Coral Dawn had disappeared. Behind them, the storm raged on, claiming the ship, but not her crew. In the cargo bay, 23 survivors huddled together. Some were crying. Some were praying. Some were simply staring at nothing, unable to process what had just happened. Marcus lay on his back, chest, heaving, arms trembling from exertion. Martinez knelt beside him. "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen anyone do." Marcus managed a weak laugh. "Did it work?" "Yeah, you crazy bastard. It worked." "Then it wasn't stupid." Martinez shook his head, but he was smiling. "Your grandfather, he ever do anything like that?" "Probably." Marcus closed his eyes. "He never told me about the times he almost died." "Smart man." The helicopter climbed above the worst of the storm. The turbulence eased. The rain lightened from a hammer to a drum. In the cockpit, Reyes's voice came over the intercom. "Cole, you still alive back there?" "Barely, ma'am." "Good. Because when we land, you're going to have a lot of explaining to do." "Am I in trouble?" A pause. "Then, you're going to be the most famous recruit in the Pacific Fleet. I don't know if that's trouble or not." Marcus thought about Ashford, about the transfer orders in his pocket, about the man who'd wanted him to fail, maybe even wanted him to die. He thought about Papa Joe, about Vietnam, about Tuskegee, about all the black men who'd done impossible things and been forgotten by a country that didn't want to remember. "Ma'am?" "Yeah. Whatever happens when we land, it was worth it." Another pause. Longer this time. "Yeah, Cole. It was." The helicopter flew on through the fading storm. 2 hours to the carrier. 2 hours to whatever came next. Marcus let himself rest. He'd earned it. The USS Valor appeared on the horizon, just as the sun began breaking through the clouds. Marcus had never seen anything more beautiful than that gray ship cutting through the calming seas. Home. Safety. The end of the longest night of his life. Navy Rescue 77 to USS Valor. We are 10 minutes out with 23 survivors aboard. Request emergency medical teams on deck. Copy 77. Medical team standing by. You are cleared for immediate landing. The helicopter descended toward the carrier. As they got closer, Marcus could see people gathering on the flight deck. Not just medical teams, not just deck crew, hundreds of sailors. "What the hell?" Martinez muttered. Reyes brought the helicopter in for a smooth landing despite the lingering crosswinds. The moment the wheels touched down, the crowd surged forward. The cargo bay door opened. Medical teams rushed in to help the survivors. But behind them, Marcus could see sailors cheering, clapping, shouting his name. "Cole! Cole! Cole!" He stumbled out of the helicopter on legs that didn't want to work anymore. The cheering got louder. Hands slapped his back. Faces he didn't recognize smiled at him like he was a hero. Because he was. He just didn't feel like one yet. Rodriguez pushed through the crowd and grabbed him in a bear hug. "You crazy son of a bitch, the whole ship was listening on the radio when you went down on that cable." He couldn't finish. His eyes were wet. "I'm okay," Marcus said. "Everyone's okay." "More than okay." Rodriguez stepped back grinning. "You're about to be a legend." Behind Rodriguez, Marcus saw a familiar face. Commander Ashford stood at the edge of the crowd watching. His expression was unreadable, but his body language spoke volumes. Stiff. Defensive. The posture of a man who'd just seen his plans crumble. Their eyes met. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out the transfer orders. Held them up so Ashford could see. Then slowly and deliberately, he tore them in half. Ashford's face went white. Senior Chief Reyes appeared beside Marcus. Her flight suit still soaked her hair plastered to her face. She followed his gaze to Ashford. "He tried to have you transferred." "Yes, ma'am. To Greenland. Effective immediately." "Is that so?" Reyes's voice went cold. "Interesting timing, don't you think? Right before a mission he might have hoped you wouldn't survive." Marcus didn't answer. He didn't have to. Reyes turned to face Ashford across the crowd, raised her voice so everyone could hear. "Commander Ashford, I need to speak with you regarding some personnel irregularities I've discovered in my office. Now." Ashford didn't move for a long moment. The crowd had gone quiet. Every eye was on him. Finally, he walked forward. Each step looked like it cost him something. When he reached Reyes, his voice was barely above a whisper. "This isn't over." "Yes, Commander. It is." She turned and walked toward the island superstructure, not looking back to see if he followed. He did. He had no choice. Marcus watched them go, feeling something shift inside his chest. Not triumph exactly. Something quieter, deeper. Justice. It didn't taste as sweet as he'd expected. It tasted like salt water and exhaustion, and the faces of 23 people who were alive because he'd refused to give up. Martinez appeared at his shoulder. "You should get to medical. Get checked out." "I'm fine." "You're running on adrenaline. In about 20 minutes you're going to crash hard." Martinez steered him toward the island. "Come on, hero's welcome can wait." Marcus let himself be led. His legs were starting to shake. His arms felt like they'd been filled with lead. But before they reached the hatch, he stopped. "Martinez." "Yeah. Thank you for lowering me down. You didn't have to." Martinez was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather was a Tuskegee mechanic. I told you that." "Yeah. What I didn't tell you was that he died thinking nobody remembered what he did. Thinking all those years of keeping planes flying, of proving himself over and over, didn't matter to anyone." Martinez's voice grew rough. "I watched you tonight. Watched you do something impossible because you refused to accept that it couldn't be done. And I thought, this is what my grandfather must have been like. This is who he was before the world beat it out of him." He met Marcus's eyes. "So thank you for reminding me what we're capable of." Marcus didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. They walked into the ship together, leaving the cheering crowd behind. The sun was fully up now, burning away the last remnants of Typhoon May. And somewhere in the distance a new storm was brewing. But that storm could wait. For now, Marcus Cole had earned his rest. Part 4. Lu Eviet, 4002 Lienket Lienmut Voikak van Truk Chungkochuan Fahoy. Marcus woke in the medical bay to the sound of voices arguing outside the door. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. The ceiling was unfamiliar. The hum of the ship felt different from his berthing compartment. Then the memories came flooding back. The storm. The rescue. The cable that had nearly slipped through his fingers. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. "Easy, sailor." A corpsman appeared at his bedside, pressing him gently back down. "You've got severe muscle strain in both arms and mild hypothermia. Doctor wants you resting for at least 24 hours. "How long was I out?" "About 16 hours. You crashed hard once the adrenaline wore off." 16 hours. Marcus stared at the ceiling, processing that. He'd lost an entire day. The voices outside grew louder. He recognized one of them. Rodriguez. I don't care what the regulations say. He needs to know what's happening. The doctor's orders were clear. This is more important than doctor's orders. The door opened. Rodriguez pushed past the corpsman, his face tight with urgency. Cole, we need to talk. What's going on? Rodriguez pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. He looked like he hadn't slept since the rescue mission. Ashford's been relieved of command. Marcus blinked. What? Senior Chief Reyes filed her complaint the moment you landed. She had 3 years of documentation, witness statements, patterns of discrimination that couldn't be explained away. Rodriguez leaned forward. But that's not all. When they searched Ashford's stateroom, they found something else. What? Emails. Between him and Commander Walsh and personnel. They were planning your transfer to Greenland for months, Cole. Before you ever touched that helicopter. Before the challenge. They wanted you gone from the day you arrived. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd known Ashford hated him, but months of planning. That was something different, something calculated and malicious. Why, what did I ever do to him? Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. You existed. You came from a place he looked down on, had a degree from a school he'd never heard of, and you had the audacity to be good at something. Men like Ashford can't stand that. It threatens everything they believe about themselves. So, what happens now? Admiral Morrison arrived 2 hours ago. He's conducting a full investigation. Ashford's confined to quarters pending formal charges. Rodriguez paused. They want to talk to you, as soon as you're able. Marcus thought about all the months of humiliation, the cleaning duty, the blocked applications, the casual cruelty that had become so routine he'd almost stopped noticing it. I'll talk to them now. The doctor said, I'll talk to them now. Rodriguez studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll let them know. Admiral William Morrison was not what Marcus expected. The man who commanded the entire Pacific Carrier Group looked more like a tired grandfather than a military legend. His hair was completely white. His face was lined with decades of hard decisions, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing, as Marcus entered the conference room. Senior Chief Reyes sat to the Admiral's right. She gave Marcus a small nod. On the Admiral's left sat a woman Marcus didn't recognize. Dark suit, no uniform, the kind of neutral expression that screamed lawyer or investigator. Petty Officer Cole. Admiral Morrison gestured to a chair across the table. Please sit. How are you feeling? Sore, sir, but functional. I've read the mission report. What you did on that cable was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've heard of in 40 years of service. I've been told it was both, sir. Morrison almost smiled. Fair enough. He opened a folder on the table. I'm going to ask you some questions about Commander Ashford. I need you to answer honestly, even if it reflects poorly on your superior officers. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Good. Morrison slid a photograph across the table, the transfer orders Marcus had torn up on the flight deck. Tell me about these. Marcus took a breath. I found them in my quarters the day of the rescue mission, before we launched. They were signed by Commander Walsh and personnel, but there was a handwritten note at the bottom, initials R.A., and the words, Promise Kept. Did you interpret that as referring to Commander Ashford? Yes, sir. Why didn't you report this immediately? Marcus met the Admiral's eyes. Because 23 people were going to die if we didn't launch. The transfer orders could wait. They couldn't. Morrison nodded slowly. And the challenge on the flight deck, the one where Commander Ashford promised to marry you if you fixed the helicopter. I have witnesses, sir. Recordings. I've seen them. Morrison's jaw tightened. I've seen all of it. The footage is illuminating. The woman in the dark suit spoke for the first time. Petty Officer Cole, I'm Special Agent Davis from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. I need to ask you about the pattern of your assignments since arriving on the USS Valor. Yes, ma'am. According to your service record, you scored in the 97th percentile on mechanical diagnostics, 94th on aviation systems. Those scores should have qualified you for advanced technical placement. Instead, you were assigned to janitorial duties. Can you explain why? No, ma'am. I was never given a reason. Did you ever request a transfer or file a complaint? Marcus hesitated. No, ma'am. Why not? The question hung in the air. Marcus thought about all the reasons he'd stayed silent. The fear of retaliation, the belief that complaining would only make things worse, the voice of his mother telling him to keep his head down, work hard, prove himself through action rather than words. Because I was raised to believe that hard work would speak for itself, that if I just kept doing my job, eventually someone would notice. He paused. I was wrong. Agent Davis nodded. Were you aware that Commander Ashford had blocked 3 separate applications you submitted for technical training programs? I suspected, but I had no proof. We have proof now. She slid another document across the table. Emails between Commander Ashford and the training department. He specifically instructed them to reject your applications, citing attitude concerns and lack of appropriate military bearing. There's no documentation to support either claim. Marcus stared at the paper. His own name, his own rejected dreams, reduced to a few lines of bureaucratic malice. I didn't know, he said quietly. I thought I just wasn't good enough. You were more than good enough. Admiral Morrison's voice was heavy with something that sounded almost like anger. You were one of the most qualified recruits to come through this command in years, and Commander Ashford buried you because you didn't fit his image of what a sailor should look like. The room was silent for a long moment. Reyes spoke up. Sir, I'd like to add that Petty Officer Cole's actions during the rescue mission demonstrated exactly the kind of initiative and competence we should be promoting, not suppressing. His diagnostic work on the Seahawk saved millions in potential repairs. His conduct during the extraction saved 23 lives. I'm aware, Senior Chief. Morrison closed his folder. Petty Officer Cole, I want to apologize. On behalf of the Navy, on behalf of this command, what happened to you should never happen to anyone who puts on this uniform. Marcus didn't know what to say. He'd imagined this moment in 100 different ways. None of them had included an admiral apologizing to him. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. We have a lot of work to do to make this right. Morrison stood. For now, I want you to rest. Recover. In 3 days, we'll discuss your future. I think you'll find it looks considerably different than it did last week. The Admiral left, followed by Agent Davis. Marcus remained seated, still processing what had just happened. Reyes lingered at the door. How does it feel? Marcus thought about the question. Strange. I keep waiting for something bad to happen. That's trauma talking. You've spent 4 months expecting to be punished for existing. It takes time to unlearn that. She walked back to the table and sat across from him. Can I tell you something my father told me once? Yes, ma'am. He said that when he came back from Vietnam, the hardest part wasn't the memories of combat. It was learning to believe he deserved to be treated with respect. He'd spent 3 years being told he was less than human because of his skin color. Even after the war, even after the medals, part of him kept waiting for someone to take it all away. Marcus nodded slowly. He understood exactly what she meant. Your grandfather helped him through that, Reyes continued. Big Joe Coleman. They stayed friends until my father died. Called each other every week. Visited when they could. Your grandfather taught my father that being a man wasn't about what other people thought of you. It was about what you knew to be true about yourself. She stood again. You know what's true about yourself, Cole. Don't let Ashford or anyone like him take that away. The next 3 days were the strangest of Marcus's life. News of the rescue mission spread through the carrier like wildfire. Sailors who'd never spoken to him before stopped him in passageways to shake his hand. Mechanics who'd laughed at Ashford's jokes now treated him with something approaching reverence. Rodriguez appointed himself Marcus's unofficial handler, keeping him fed, rested, and away from the constant stream of well-wishers who wanted a piece of the hero. "You're going to have to learn to deal with this," Rodriguez said over dinner in the mess hall. "Fame doesn't go away just because you're uncomfortable with it. I don't want fame. I just want to work on helicopters." Too late for that. You saved 23 people on live radio. Half the Pacific Fleet was listening. By now, the story's probably reached Washington. Marcus pushed his food around his plate. He hadn't had much appetite since the mission. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the coral dawn slipping beneath the waves. "Rodriguez, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Did you know about what Ashford was doing to me?" Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. His fork stopped moving. "I suspected. I didn't know the full extent, but I knew something was wrong. Your assignments didn't match your qualifications. The way Ashford talked about you when you weren't around." He shook his head. "I should have said something. I should have done more." "Why didn't you?" "Because I was scared." The admission seemed to cost Rodriguez something. Ashford had power, connections. "I've got 15 years until retirement, a daughter in college, a mortgage I can barely afford." I told myself it wasn't my business. That you'd either figure it out or wash out, and either way, it wouldn't be my problem. He met Marcus's eyes. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Marcus thought about all the people who'd known and said nothing, all the small silences that had added up to 4 months of humiliation. "You helped when it mattered," he finally said. "On the flight deck, during the rescue. You believed me when no one else would. That doesn't make up for the months I didn't." "No, but it's a start." The formal hearing convened on the 4th day. Commander Richard Ashford sat at the defense table, his uniform still immaculate, his posture still rigid with military bearing. But something was different about him, something broken behind his eyes. Admiral Morrison presided over a panel of 3 senior officers. Agent Davis sat at the prosecution table with a stack of documents thick enough to anchor a ship. Marcus was called as a witness. He walked to the front of the room and took his seat, conscious of Ashford's eyes boring into him from 20 feet away. He'd imagined this moment too, standing in judgment of the man who'd tried to destroy him. It didn't feel as satisfying as he'd expected. "Petty Officer Cole." The prosecuting officer, a commander named Stevens, stood from his table. "Please describe your first interaction with Commander Ashford." Marcus thought back to that day. It felt like a lifetime ago. "I reported aboard the USS Valor on March 15th of this year. Commander Ashford was waiting on the quarterdeck when I arrived. He looked at my file, looked at me, and said, 'Another one from nowhere. We'll find something for you to do.' What did you interpret that to mean?" "I didn't know at the time, sir, but I learned quickly that something meant cleaning toilets and inventorying supplies." "Despite your qualifications?" "Yes, sir." The testimony went on for over an hour. Marcus recounted every incident he could remember: the blocked applications, the demeaning comments, the systematic exclusion from anything that might have advanced his career. Through it all, Ashford sat motionless. His lawyer occasionally objected, but the objections were overruled. The evidence was too overwhelming. Finally, Commander Stevens asked the question Marcus had been dreading. "Petty Officer Cole, on the night of the helicopter repair, Commander Ashford challenged you publicly. He said, and I quote, 'Fix this engine, and I'll marry you myself.' How did that make you feel?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. He could have said angry, humiliated, determined to prove him wrong, but the truth was more complicated than that. "Honestly, sir, it made me feel like I was 9 years old again." "Can you elaborate?" "When I was 9, my grandfather took me to a hangar to watch him fix a helicopter that everyone said was dead. People laughed at him, said he was wasting his time, Said an old black man from Louisiana couldn't possibly know more than engineers with degrees and fancy equipment. Marcus paused. He fixed it anyway. And when he was done, he told me something I've never forgotten. What did he tell you? He said, they laughed because they were scared. Scared that everything they believed about who deserves respect and who doesn't might be wrong. When you prove them wrong, you're not just fixing an engine. You're breaking something inside them that needs to break. The room was silent. That's how Ashford's challenge made me feel, sir. Like I had a chance to break something that needed to break. Commander Stevens nodded slowly. No further questions. Ashford's lawyer stood for cross-examination. He was a thin man with nervous eyes who clearly knew he was fighting a losing battle. Petty Officer Cole, isn't it possible that you've misinterpreted Commander Ashford's intentions? That what you saw as discrimination was simply high standards? No, sir. How can you be certain? Because high standards would have applied to everyone. Commander Ashford had different standards for different people. And those differences tracked with what people looked like, not what they were capable of. That's a serious accusation. It's also true. The evidence supports it. The lawyer shuffled his papers, clearly searching for another angle of attack. He found none. No further questions. The hearing continued for 2 more days. Other witnesses testified. Rodriguez, Martinez. The mechanics who'd watched Ashford's treatment of Marcus and said nothing until now. Even some of Ashford's former allies cutting deals to save their own careers by telling the truth about his. The pattern that emerged was damning. Ashford had been systematically discriminating against minority sailors for years, burying qualified candidates, promoting less capable officers who looked the way he thought officers should look, building a command structure based on prejudice rather than merit. And he'd done it all while hiding behind the language of standards and excellence. On the final day, Admiral Morrison delivered the panel's findings. Commander Richard Ashford, this panel finds you guilty of conduct unbecoming an officer, discrimination in violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and conspiracy to circumvent lawful personnel procedures. Ashford showed no reaction. His face might as well have been carved from stone. You are hereby reduced in rank to Lieutenant Commander effective immediately. Your command of the aviation detachment is terminated. You will be transferred to administrative duty pending further investigation of potential criminal charges. Still no reaction. Additionally, the panel recommends that your record be permanently flagged to prevent future promotion or command responsibility. You have demonstrated a fundamental failure of leadership that this Navy cannot tolerate. Morrison closed his folder. Do you have anything to say? For a long moment, Ashford said nothing. Then slowly he turned to look at Marcus. Their eyes met. Marcus expected to see hatred, rage, the burning resentment of a man whose career had just been destroyed. Instead, he saw something worse. Nothing. Ashford's eyes were empty. Whatever had driven him, whatever twisted sense of superiority had fueled years of discrimination, was simply gone. Burned out. Leaving behind a hollow shell in a uniform that no longer meant what it used to. No, Ashford said quietly. Nothing. They led him out of the hearing room. Marcus watched him go, waiting to feel triumph. He felt only sadness. Later that evening, Marcus stood on the flight deck, watching the sun set over the Pacific. Reyes found him there, leaning against the railing, lost in thought. It's over, she said, standing beside him. How do you feel? Empty. That's normal. Revenge fantasies are always more satisfying than the reality. It's not that. Marcus shook his head. I keep thinking about what my grandfather would say, about whether any of this actually changed anything. It changed everything. Ashford's gone. The people he protected are being investigated. New policies are being implemented. But the next Ashford is already out there. The next recruit who doesn't fit someone's image of what they should be is already being pushed aside. Reyes was quiet for a moment. You're right. This doesn't fix everything. It doesn't even fix most things. But it fixes something, and that's how change happens. One fixed thing at a time. She turned to face him. Tomorrow, Admiral Morrison wants to meet with you. He has a proposal. What kind of proposal? The kind that changes careers. She smiled slightly. Get some rest, Cole. You've got a big day ahead. Marcus didn't move. He stayed on the deck long after Reyes left, watching the last light fade from the sky. He thought about Papa Joe, about all the times his grandfather had done impossible things and received nothing in return. No medals, no recognition. Just the quiet satisfaction of work well done and the knowledge that he'd made a difference, even if no one else noticed. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Hello. Papa Joe, it's Marcus. Boy. The joy in his grandfather's voice was immediate and overwhelming. I've been watching the news. They're saying you're some kind of hero. I just did my job, Papa Joe. That's what heroes always say. His grandfather laughed, then coughed. His lungs weren't what they used to be. Tell me everything. Don't leave anything out. So Marcus told him. The helicopter. The challenge. The storm. The cable that had nearly slipped through his fingers. The people he'd saved. The justice that had finally come. When he finished, Papa Joe was quiet for a long time. You did good, boy. Better than good. You did what I always knew you could do. I couldn't have done any of it without what you taught me. No. Papa Joe's voice was firm. What I taught you was how to listen. What you did with that listening was all you. The courage, the determination, the refusal to give up even when giving up was the smart thing to do. That's not something anyone can teach. That's who you are. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. He blinked them back. I miss you, Papa Joe. I miss you too, boy. But I'm proud of you. Prouder than I've ever been of anything in my life. His voice grew thick. Your daddy would be proud too. He's watching from somewhere. I know it. Marcus couldn't speak. The tears were coming now, and he couldn't stop them. You go on and do what you need to do, Papa Joe continued. Make your mark on this world, and when you're done, come home. I'll be waiting. I will, Papa Joe, I promise. I know you will, boy. I know you will. The call ended. Marcus stood alone on the flight deck, tears streaming down his face, watching the stars come out one by one. He thought about his father, who'd died when Marcus was 6. About his mother, who'd worked 2 jobs to keep them fed. About all the people who'd sacrificed so that he could be standing here on this ship at this moment. They'd given him everything. Now it was time to give something back. Marcus wiped his eyes and headed below. Tomorrow he would meet with Admiral Morrison. Tomorrow his future would begin to take shape. But tonight he would rest. He would remember. He would be grateful. And in the morning he would rise. Admiral Morrison's office was smaller than Marcus expected. No grand desk, no wall of medals and commendations, just a simple room with a table, 4 chairs, and a window overlooking the flight deck where everything had changed. Marcus stood at attention until the Admiral gestured for him to sit. Relax, Cole. This isn't a formal meeting. Marcus sat, but relaxing was beyond him. His whole body was wound tight with anticipation. Morrison studied him for a long moment. You know why you're here. Senior Chief Reyes mentioned a proposal, sir. She didn't give details. That's because I wanted to tell you myself. Morrison opened a folder on the table. I've been in the Navy for 41 years. Started as an enlisted man, worked my way up. Saw a lot of things that made me proud of this uniform. Saw a lot of things that made me ashamed of it too. He slid a document across the table. What Ashford did to you was criminal. Not just legally, but morally. He took a young man with extraordinary potential and tried to bury him because of prejudice, because of fear, because you threatened his narrow view of what excellence looks like. Marcus looked at the document. Official letterhead, his name at the top. But here's what Ashford didn't understand, Morrison continued. He thought he was protecting something by keeping people like you down. He thought the Navy would be weaker if we promoted based on merit instead of other factors. He was wrong. The Navy is weaker because of men like him, and it's stronger because of men like you. Marcus read the document, then read it again. The words didn't make sense. Sir, this says, Warrant Officer Commission, effective immediately, specialization in advanced aviation diagnostics. Morrison leaned back. You'll be assigned to the Pacific Fleet's new Maintenance Innovation Unit. Your job will be to train mechanics across the fleet in the techniques you demonstrated during the helicopter repair. Marcus's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I don't know what to say, sir. Say yes. Morrison almost smiled. But that's not all. He slid another document across the table. The procedure you used to flush the Seahawk's gearbox. The one you invented on the spot using principles your grandfather taught you. We sent it to the Pentagon's engineering division for evaluation. What did they say? They said it shouldn't have worked. The physics were sound, but the application was unprecedented. No one had ever tried reverse pressure flushing on an MH-60R gearbox. Morrison's eyes met his. Then they tested it, in controlled conditions, on 3 different helicopters with similar debris contamination. And it worked every time, saved an estimated $200,000 per aircraft in maintenance costs, reduced gearbox failure rates by 37%. Marcus sat very still. He wasn't sure he was breathing. They're calling it the Cole Protocol, Morrison said. It's being added to the standard maintenance manual for all MH-60 variants across the Navy, Marines, and Coast Guard. Your grandfather's techniques, the ones he learned fixing helicopters in Vietnam, are now official military procedure. The words hit Marcus like a physical force. All those years of Papa Joe being dismissed. All those decades of knowledge passed down in a Louisiana garage, treated like folk wisdom instead of engineering brilliance. Now it was official. Now it mattered. I need to call my grandfather. Marcus said, his voice rough. You will. But first, I need your answer. Will you accept the commission? Marcus looked at the documents. Warrant Officer, Innovation Unit. The Cole Protocol. 6 months ago, he'd been cleaning toilets and wondering if he'd ever touch an aircraft engine. Yes, sir, I accept. Morrison stood and extended his hand. Congratulations, Warrant Officer Cole. You've earned this. Marcus shook his hand. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me. Thank yourself. And thank your grandfather. Morrison walked him to the door. One more thing. The scientists you rescued from the Coral Dawn. They've been asking to meet you. Their research vessel went down, but their data survived. They want to thank you personally. I'd like that, sir. I thought you might. They're waiting in the conference room. Marcus found 23 people gathered around the long table. They looked different than they had during the rescue. Clean, dry, rested. But their eyes carried the same haunted quality he'd seen on the deck of the sinking ship. When he entered, they all stood. Mr. Cole! An older woman stepped forward. Silver hair, weathered face. The kind of hands that had spent decades working with specimens and instruments. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. I was the lead researcher on the Coral Dawn. Ma'am, we wanted to thank you. Her voice wavered. What you did on that cable. Going down there when you didn't have to. Risking your life for people you'd never met. It was my job, ma'am. No. Dr. Chen shook her head firmly. Going down on that hoist was beyond any job description. You chose to do that. And because of that choice, 23 families didn't lose someone they love. The other scientists murmured agreement. Some were crying. One young man, barely older than Marcus, was openly sobbing. We've been talking, Dr. Chen continued, about how to repay you. We know we can't, not really, but we wanted to try. She handed him an envelope. What's this? A letter of recommendation. For whatever you want to do next. Signed by all 23 of us. She smiled through her tears. We may just be marine biologists, but some of us have connections. MIT, Stanford, Woods Hole Oceanographic. If you ever want to pursue education, these doors will be open to you. Marcus held the envelope like it was made of glass. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep being the man you are. Dr. Chen put her hand on his arm. The world needs more people like you. People who run toward danger instead of away from it. People who see strangers in trouble and think, that's my problem to solve. Marcus thought about his grandfather, about all the strangers Papa Joe had helped over the years fixing cars for people who couldn't pay, keeping equipment running for farmers who would have lost everything without his skills. My grandfather taught me that, he said quietly. He said we're all connected whether we know it or not. When you help someone, you're really helping everyone, including yourself. Dr. Chen nodded. Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. The wisest I've ever known. The ceremony took place 3 days later. Marcus stood on the flight deck in his dress blues, surrounded by sailors he'd served with for 6 months. Rodriguez was there beaming like a proud father. Martinez stood at attention, his face solemn but his eyes warm. Even some of the mechanics who'd laughed at Ashford's jokes were present. Their expressions complicated mixtures of shame and respect. Senior Chief Reyes administered the oath. Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Marcus Jerome Cole, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Marcus repeated the words, feeling their weight settle into his bones. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. That I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. The Pacific wind caught the flag above them, snapping it taut against the sky. And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter. So help me God. So help me God, Marcus said. Reyes pinned the warrant officer insignia to his collar. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were wet. Congratulations, Mr. Cole. The flight deck erupted in applause. Marcus stood there letting the moment wash over him. 6 months ago, he'd arrived on this ship with nothing but hope and his grandfather's lessons. Now, he was an officer. His techniques were being taught across the fleet. His name was attached to a protocol that would save lives and money for decades to come. But none of that mattered as much as the phone call he made that evening. Papa Joe answered on the second ring. Boy, I've been waiting by this phone all day. Papa Joe, I have news. I know. Admiral Morrison called me this morning. Marcus blinked. He called you? Said he wanted to thank me personally for teaching you what I taught you, for keeping those techniques alive when everyone else was forgetting them. Papa Joe's voice cracked. He said you saved 23 lives using what I taught you. Said your protocol is going to be standard procedure for the whole military. It's true, Papa Joe. All of it. Silence on the line. Then a sound that Marcus had never heard before. His grandfather was crying. Papa Joe, are you okay? I'm better than okay, boy. He couldn't finish. 70 years of being dismissed. 70 years of knowing he was capable of things that people refused to recognize. And now, finally, acknowledgement. Validation. Proof that his life's work had mattered. I wish I could be there, Marcus said. I wish you could see this. I don't need to see it. I can feel it. Papa Joe's voice steadied. You know what I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling like all those years of being told I was nothing were worth it. Because they led to this. They led to you. Marcus gripped the phone so hard his knuckles went white. I love you, Papa Joe. I love you too, boy. More than you'll ever know. They talked for another hour. About the past, about the future. About all the things that fathers and sons and grandfathers say to each other when they finally understand that the thread connecting them is stronger than time. When Marcus finally hung up, he sat alone in his quarters staring at the wall. He thought about his father, who'd died too young. About his mother, who'd sacrificed everything. About all the ancestors whose names he'd never know, who'd survived slavery, and Jim Crow, and 100 other horrors, so that he could be here. Their legacy lived in him. And now, through him, it would live on. The next 6 months transformed everything. Marcus threw himself into the Maintenance Innovation Unit with the same intensity he'd applied to fixing the Seahawk. He traveled to bases across the Pacific, teaching mechanics techniques that combined his grandfather's wisdom with modern engineering principles. At first, some of the older mechanics resisted. They'd been trained to trust computers and diagnostic equipment, not their ears and hands. The idea that a helicopter could talk to them seemed like superstition. But Marcus was patient, the way Papa Joe had been patient with him. "Close your eyes," he told a skeptical chief petty officer at Naval Air Station Pensacola. "Put your hand on the engine housing. Tell me what you feel." "I feel metal, vibration." "Go deeper. Feel the rhythm. Is it steady?" "I guess. I don't know." "You do know. You've just forgotten how to listen." Marcus guided the man's hand to a different position. "Now here, feel the difference." The chief's eyes opened slowly. "There's something off, like a slight hesitation." "That's the number 3 fuel injector. It's about to fail. Computer won't flag it for another 100 flight hours. But the engine is telling us right now." They pulled the injector. It was damaged exactly as Marcus had predicted. Word spread. Mechanics who'd initially dismissed his methods started paying attention. Pilots requested his diagnostic services before high-risk missions. Commands across the fleet began incorporating his training into their standard programs. The Cole Protocol became more than just a gearbox procedure. It became a philosophy, a way of understanding machines that prioritized intuition alongside instrumentation. Rodriguez visited him in California 3 months into the new assignment. "You're famous now," Rodriguez said over beers at a bar near the base. "People talk about you like you're some kind of legend." "I'm just a mechanic." "No, you're not." Rodriguez shook his head. "You're proof that the system can work, that someone can come from nowhere and rise on merit. That prejudice doesn't have to win. The system almost destroyed me. If it hadn't been for Reyes for you for the rescue mission, but it didn't destroy you. That's the point." Rodriguez leaned forward. "Look, I'm not saying the system is fixed. It's not. There are still Ashfords out there. Still people who'll look at a kid from Louisiana with a community college degree and decide he's not worth their time. But now when that happens, people will remember your story. They'll think, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this kid is the next Marcus Cole. And some of them will give that kid a chance." Marcus thought about that, about the ripple effects of his actions spreading outward through time. "What happened to Ashford?" he asked. Rodriguez's expression darkened. "Reassigned to a desk job in Norfolk, pushing papers until his retirement in 3 years. No pension bonus, no honors. Just a quiet exit and a file full of disciplinary actions that'll follow him forever. Is that enough? Is justice ever enough?" Rodriguez finished his beer. "He didn't go to prison. Some people think he should have, but his career is over. His reputation is destroyed. Everyone who ever respected him now knows what he really was." Marcus nodded slowly. "My grandfather used to say that the worst punishment for a prideful man isn't prison. It's having to live with everyone knowing who he really is." "Your grandfather was right." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun set through the bar's dirty windows. "I'm retiring next year," Rodriguez said finally. "I heard. 20 years is enough. I want to spend time with my daughter, maybe learn to fish." He turned to Marcus. "But before I go, I wanted to tell you something." "What?" "I was scared of Ashford for years. I kept my head down, did my job, didn't make waves. I told myself I was being smart, being strategic, but the truth is, I was just being a coward. Rodriguez, let me finish. Rodriguez's voice was firm. When you stood up to him that night, when you accepted his challenge, even though everyone expected you to fail, you showed me something. You showed me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid. He met Marcus's eyes. I spent 20 years being afraid. You spent 6 months being brave. And look which one of us made a difference. Marcus didn't know what to say, so he just reached out and clasped Rodriguez's shoulder. You made a difference too. You believed me when no one else would. You helped me when you didn't have to. That's not enough. It's more than you think. They finished their beers in comfortable silence. Two men who'd been through something together and come out the other side, changed. 1 year later, Marcus stood at the podium of the Naval Aviation Technical Training Center in Pensacola, Florida. In front of him sat 200 new recruits, their faces young and eager and uncertain. Behind him hung a banner that read, Cole Advanced Diagnostic Training Program, Class 1. His training program. His legacy. Good morning, Marcus said. My name is Warrant Officer Marcus Cole. A year ago, I was cleaning toilets on an aircraft carrier. Today I'm here to teach you something that might save your life or someone else's. The recruits shifted in their seats, curious. I'm going to teach you how to listen. He clicked to the first slide. A photograph of Papa Joe taken in Vietnam, standing beside a Huey helicopter with a wrench in his hand. This is my grandfather, Joseph Coleman. In 1968, he was one of the only black mechanics in his unit. The pilots didn't want him touching their helicopters. The other mechanics didn't want him in their shop. His commanding officer told him that colored boys didn't have the brains for helicopter engines. Marcus let that sink in. He spent 3 years proving them wrong. He kept birds flying when parts didn't exist. He diagnosed problems that stumped engineers with fancy degrees. He saved lives by listening to engines when everyone else trusted computers that weren't invented yet. He clicked to the next slide. The MH-60R Seahawk he'd fixed on the USS Valor. A year ago, this helicopter was dead. 20 mechanics couldn't figure out what was wrong. The commanding officer said it was impossible to fix. He told me that my community college education wasn't qualified to diagnose a $40 million aircraft. Marcus smiled slightly. He was wrong. The helicopter told me what was wrong. I listened. And I fixed it. He stepped out from behind the podium. Some of you come from military families. Some of you come from nowhere. Some of you have engineering degrees. Some of you barely finished high school. It doesn't matter. What I'm about to teach you doesn't require money or connections or a diploma from a school someone's heard of. It just requires patience, humility, and the willingness to learn. He looked out at the faces watching him. Black faces. White faces, brown faces, young men and women from every corner of America brought together by the uniform they wore. Over the next 8 weeks, I'm going to teach you to hear what machines are saying, to feel what instruments can't measure, to trust your instincts even when everyone tells you you're wrong. He paused. But more importantly, I'm going to teach you that excellence doesn't care where you come from. It only cares what you're willing to do. He clicked to the final slide. A quote from Papa Joe, the same words that had guided Marcus through every challenge he'd faced. Every machine has a heartbeat. Close your eyes. Feel what it's trying to tell you. Marcus looked at the recruits one last time. Class begins tomorrow at 0600. Get some rest. You're going to need it. That evening, Marcus drove to a nursing home outside Baton Rouge. He'd made this trip every month since receiving his commission. 4 hours each way, but worth every minute. Papa Joe was waiting for him in the common room, dressed in his best shirt, the one with the Tuskegee Airman patch his friends had given him decades ago. Boy, the old man's face lit up. You're late. Traffic, Papa Joe. Traffic, my ass. You stopped for crawfish again. Marcus couldn't help smiling. Maybe. He wheeled his grandfather out to the garden where they could talk in private. The Louisiana evening was warm and humid, thick with the smell of magnolias and distant rain. "How's the training program?" "Good. 200 recruits in the first class. They're eager. Some of them remind me of myself." "That's good." Papa Joe nodded slowly. "That's real good." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching fireflies begin their evening dance. "I got a letter today," Papa Joe said finally. "From who?" "From the Secretary of the Navy." The old man's voice was quiet, reverent. "They're giving me a commendation for my service in Vietnam and my lasting contribution to naval aviation maintenance procedures." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Papa Joe, that's wonderful. It's 60 years too late." But there was no bitterness in his voice, only acceptance. "But I'll take it. Not for me. For all the boys who served with me who aren't here to see it." He reached out and took Marcus's hand. His grip was weak, but his eyes were strong. "You did this, boy. You made them see what they should have seen all along. You did this, Papa Joe. I just carried it forward." The old man smiled. It was the same smile Marcus remembered from childhood, from long afternoons in the garage, from lessons about engines that were really lessons about life. "I'm tired, boy. More tired than I've ever been." "I know, Papa Joe. I think I'll sleep soon. Really sleep." Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. "Don't talk like that." "It's okay." Papa Joe squeezed his hand. "I've lived long enough to see everything I hoped for. My grandson an officer. My techniques saving lives across the world. My story finally being told." He closed his eyes. "That's more than most men get. That's enough." They sat together until the stars came out. Marcus thought about legacy, about the things we pass down without knowing we're passing them down. About how a man who'd been dismissed his whole life had shaped the future of military aviation through his grandson's hands. "I love you, Papa Joe." "I love you too, boy. Always have. Always will." 2 weeks later, Joseph Big Joe Coleman passed away in his sleep. He was 84 years old. He died with the Secretary of the Navy's commendation framed on his wall and his grandson's photograph in his hand. The funeral was small but meaningful. Marcus gave the eulogy. He talked about engines and helicopters and the lessons that had shaped his life. He talked about courage and persistence and the power of refusing to give up. Rodriguez came. Martinez came. Even Admiral Morrison came in full dress uniform to pay respects to a man he'd never met, but whose legacy had touched the entire Navy. At the graveside, Marcus placed a single item in the casket: the wrench Papa Joe had carried through Vietnam. The same wrench that had taught Marcus how to listen. The same wrench that had, in its own way, saved 23 lives in a typhoon thousands of miles from Louisiana. "Rest now, Papa Joe," Marcus whispered. "I'll take it from here." 5 years later, Warrant Officer Marcus Cole stood before a graduating class at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. Behind him, a banner proclaimed, "Cole Institute for Advanced Aviation Diagnostics, Annual Address." The institute bore his name now. 3 buildings, 40 instructors. The most advanced maintenance training facility in the world, built on principles that a black mechanic had developed in a Louisiana garage and refined in the jungles of Vietnam. Marcus looked out at the graduating midshipmen. "Future officers, future leaders. You're about to enter a world that will test everything you believe about yourself," he told them. "You'll face challenges that seem impossible. You'll encounter people who will tell you that you can't, that you shouldn't, that you don't belong." He paused, letting the words settle. "When that happens, I want you to remember something. Excellence has no color. Courage has no pedigree. The measure of a person isn't where they come from. It's what they do when everything says they should fail." He thought about Papa Joe, about Ashford, about the helicopter that had changed everything. "My grandfather spent 60 years being told he wasn't good enough. He died knowing he was. That's the only victory that matters. Marcus straightened. Now go out there and earn your own. The auditorium erupted in applause. Marcus walked off the stage, past the rows of young faces that would carry his lessons into the future, past the photographs of his grandfather that now hung in places of honor throughout the Navy. Outside, the sun was setting over Chesapeake Bay. Marcus stood alone, watching the light fade. He thought about all the broken things he'd fixed over the years. Helicopters. Careers. The system itself, piece by piece, person by person. There was still so much work to do. Still so many Ashfords. Still so many recruits being told they weren't good enough. But change was happening. Slowly. Painfully. One fixed thing at a time. Marcus pulled out his phone and looked at his grandfather's photograph. The old man was smiling, standing beside a helicopter, a wrench in his hand. "I hope I made you proud, Papa Joe." The wind carried his words out over the water, and somewhere, somehow, Marcus could swear he heard his grandfather's voice one last time. "You did good, boy. You did real good." Marcus smiled. Then he turned and walked back into the world, ready for whatever came next. Because that's what Coles do. They fix what's broken. They listen when others won't. And they never ever give up.